Robin from Deputy Editor of the Local Government Chronicle.
I've got nothing up here. It's been prepared in advance, which is some examples of where my company's group, which is EMAP, has used InstantAtlas for two projects. I think we're alternating between something that LGC used, which I'll come on to talk about, and something that HSJ, which is the Health Service Journal, also used about the same sort of time. Apologies for the scraps of paper. Allegedly, I was in charge this morning and said to myself I would go away and sit on a settee and spend some time and make some smart-looking notes, and probably because I was in charge, I didn't get that chance. 35 years ago this month, I started as a journalist, and the nature of news and the nature of data and its impact on news has just been profound. I mean, the technologies that we used in those days, if I went out on a story and there wasn't a public call box, I had to go and knock on a door and ask a lady who was hopefully in that whether I could borrow her phone, so while she made the tea I was dictating stories. I then moved, that was the late 70s, and by the early 80s I was working in radio, and we had the old-fashioned quarter-inch tape. Nobody knew anything about digital in those days. And that was a very standard form of journalism whereby the economics of it was such that people were prepared to pay. They bought their weekly newspapers, they bought their daily newspapers, whatever it might be. And the data that we provided in those days, I guess, I wasn't working in magazines until quite recently, but I know that MRW, which is a magazine I also work on, and LGC would have produced the annual handbooks and information like that. So quite a lot of still data-rich material, but in a very formal, structured and obviously paper-based way. Well, now obviously the nature of the digital revolution has revolutionised the way that we gather news, but it's also had a very profound effect on, for example, the magazine industry that I work in, whereby, and I think the same for newspapers as well, is that people bluntly aren't prepared to pay for news. They can get their news from wherever they want. We all know about the various social medias. And I think probably for LGC in particular, and in the sense between these four walls, I mean the age and the readership of LGC is such that its chief executives and senior directors, they're getting older together and they're being more and more willing as they come into new posts to embrace new methods of finding out the news and everything else. So for us, we see data as a project, called the project, whereby we offer value to our readers and our subscribers to make them want to carry on reading the magazine, going online, checking the website and getting involved in whatever other projects we might do. For example, the LGC Awards, which is a very big event that we do, and Harrow was shortlisted as Most Improved Council last year, which reminded me of the last speaker. So the whole of what we're doing, if we just carried on with magazines just on paper, arriving on people's desks every week, then there isn't a business there in the future, and I don't think that's a secret at all. So we're thinking about how we add value with the data, because it's the presentation of that data. The information's all out there under the transparency agendas and FOI requests and everything we can impose on you poor people mostly. And putting that together and creating something that is a valuable and additional resource tool is where we need to go. And I should also say that when I said MRW, which is a Materials Recycling World Weekly, which covers the waste management industry as well, so there is some local government overlap there, but it's pretty much a large commercial and private sector as well, once you take out Eric Pickle's particular area. So there was a meeting which I didn't actually attend a couple of years ago, which my colleagues from HSJ, actually, in a sense, this is a sort of a presentation from somebody who is quite an amateur in the technological side of this, because we don't have dedicated people working on our data or on our technical side. I am the web editor. I've been working on websites on and off for the last 10 or 12 years, but very much more on an editorial side. When things go wrong all the time, you tend to pick up understandings of how the website works or how a database pulls together a web page, but I certainly can't do any of the technical fixing. Our colleagues at HSJ, I'm now scrambling my paper, sorry, came up with a map first of all, which they were showing, and this is slightly dated because of the changes that are coming in, which was the world-class commissioning scores for PCTs. Very interesting. I don't know if these things coming out. I don't know. But anyway, allowing you to drill down every which way into every type of. I'll read you the list. Click on a PCT to see how the scores compare with others. Obviously, that's great for different organisations. Toggling between the list and a chart showing each total score, which apparently was quite important at that point. The reason why I say it's probably not important now is because obviously PCTs are on the way out. Highlight PCTs that fall within a particular range of scores. All of these things are fairly obvious, but was a useful tool and was a very helpful addition to the interpretation of the data that HSJ had, but really couldn't make present available. We were doing at about the same time the LGA Local Government Association got into sort of a bit of a row about how many jobs would be going and in the coming year, and of course they come up with a big figure, it gets headlined, and then the politicians say, no, it won't be like that at all. So we were trying to do our own stuff around that, and some of the unions had identified, I think the GMB had identified particular councils, and we phoned up 200 and got data from 150 of them, their own individual cuts, both in posts and people in effect. So we therefore had a spreadsheet which created a very interesting article in LGC, or was going to be a very interesting article in LGC as we worked on it. And then we thought, well, what we really want to do is put it online. And we want to make much more of this, because obviously on the magazine, 3-4 pages. And so we had various conversations backwards and forwards on the phone where we had the information, they took it, backwards and forwards process, and we came up with a map that allowed us to, quite nicely by showing different authorities, to show which type of authorities, nicely mapped out, were doing more or less than what were the sort of general percentage figures. So that it allowed us to illustrate, for example, that Mets were more. We're talking about last year's figures, so this will be the financial year last year, budget year last year. So that Mets were being hit more than London boroughs, and less than them were the unitaries and the Shire counties and the districts. So it's really interesting, and I think that has a sort of a usefulness for bearing in mind that our readers are chief execs and directors. And, they're going to want to go in and say to themselves, how's my neighbour doing? How's my rival? Somebody maybe on the other side of the country they bump into again. And so it's very useful for us to be able to have that sort of tool available on their friendly URL in the magazine, so people can get there straight away, an alias, so people can get there straight away. And it gave us something that was additional, so it goes back to what I was saying about news and the value of it. If we're telling hard-pressed councils that they really shouldn't be cutting the number of LGCs they're ordering, we need things like this. We need support outside the magazine to make it worth the subscription that we're asking either the individuals concerned or the councils to pay for. I've described the process that we went through, which was remote. We never ever met until today. A colleague of mine had actually most of the work. She collated all the, Ruth Keeney collated, she's our chief reporter, collated all the material together. She was the one that made most of the phone calls. And then we had discussions, and it was quite interesting because I was talking about, I wrote down sort of lessons, and that's probably a bit strong, but some of the learning points. We are not technical people, and I think journalists need to be much more comfortable these days with data, how you interpret data, and the potential for data. I think historically it tended to be people who were financial journalists understood, detailed accounts, and everybody else just got on and wrote whatever the story was about. And I think everybody's aware now, the journalists I work with, but in both titles that I work on, that data is absolutely fundamental to what we're doing. At the same time, the organisations you're working with need to understand, and they did, but I want to say you have to explain very clearly that you're talking about different types of councils, they're doing different sorts of jobs, and so you all understand exactly where you're coming from, that the communication is vital. I think you had a honeymoon in between, married and honeymoon in between, but we got there, and it's interesting how that works through. I've had some experiences on websites about 10 or 12 years ago, which were going belly up as we were doing them technically, and you learn so much that way as well. So the things that go wrong, the things that don't quite work out, are very valuable lessons as well to share with your colleagues, so that when they themselves have to engage in a project, they understand that what they need to explain and how it works. And we did get one or two conversations about how councils were configured. MRW, I think, is likely to want to have nothing online really apart from the online version of our news, which is pretty much the same sort of thing, and a database of prices in the sector for metals. You can imagine all the things that the waste sector needs to know. I think that MRW's got scope, for example, for a really interesting interactive tool around which councils are using which contractors, what their recycling rates are, when they collect, when they don't collect, all that sort of stuff. In other words, an online handbook. I think that would look really interesting, and I think that would serve both the local authorities and the contractors who are looking for their business. And I think in LGC we would consider mapping around to illustrate some of the research going on into the magazine around council tax levels, who's freezing, who's not, the income from business rates when they finally work out how they're going to redistribute business rates, what goes where, the input around the LEPs. So I think there's plenty of scope for us. We're a pretty small organisation, and so I think that these things have to be done by steps. But I think that the process is one that we're all learning with, and it's certainly where we want to go in future. And it's a really interesting exercise, and I think that for the journalists themselves, who maybe 10 or 12 years ago might have gone, what's this all about, why is this going to impact on me? I think they can see, you could just see some of the centre spreads, for example, in The Guardian, where they display data fantastically well sometimes. There's things you want to stick on your wall, they're fantastic posters. Journalists are now saying, yes, this is more for me than just writing a story. This is all part of a really good way of telling a story.